Can you pretend to be my wife today?" The towering rancher asked the black seamstress, his calloused hands trembling as dust swirled between them on the frontier street. The woman had endured 2 years of cruel whispers and deliberate dismissals from the townspeople who saw her as nothing more than an unwelcome outsider destined for servitude or silence. But the desperate giant before her carried secrets that could change everything. His family's ranch teetered on collapse, and mysterious Eastern investors expected to meet a wife who didn't exist. What neither knew was that their charade would expose a deadly conspiracy threatening to destroy every small ranch in the territory, and that her hidden past held the key to either their salvation or their complete ruin. Could two outcasts fool seasoned businessmen, or would their deception cost them everything they'd ever hoped to achieve? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook Creek as Evelyn Harper carried her basket of mended clothes toward the general store. 2 years in this Arizona Territory town had taught her to keep her eyes forward and her expectations low. The whispers followed her like tumbleweeds. Mrs. Patterson clutched her shawl tighter as Evie approached the store steps. The banker's wife had made her feelings clear from day one. No amount of perfect stitching or fair prices would change that. Inside the store, Mr. Henderson barely glanced up from his ledger. 3 other customers suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. Evie placed the neatly folded garments on the counter and waited. Henderson counted out her payment with obvious reluctance. The coins clinked against the wooden surface. Not enough. Never enough. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped back into the dusty street. Her small cabin on the town's edge felt miles away. The abandoned schoolhouse sat between here and there, its broken windows catching the light like promises she couldn't afford to keep. A massive shadow fell across her path. Silas Malone stood 6 feet 8 inches of uncertainty. His hat looked small in his enormous hands. The other townspeople gave him plenty of space, but their reasons differed from hers. They feared his size. She simply had nowhere else to go. He shifted his weight from boot to boot. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill. "Miss Harper," his voice rumbled like distant thunder. She nodded. They had spoken perhaps a dozen words in 2 years. His late brother had always handled the ranch business in town. "I need to ask you something." He glanced around at the watching faces. Something private. Every conversation in Millbrook Creek became public knowledge within the hour. Evie followed him toward the edge of town anyway. She had little reputation left to protect. They stopped beside the old oak tree where the main road split toward the ranches. Silas twisted his hat brim until she thought it might tear. "Eastern businessmen are coming today. Big investors from back east." The words tumbled out faster now. "They think I'm married." Evie raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "My brother wrote to them before he died. Made up stories about my wife to make the ranch sound more stable." Silas's face flushed red above his beard. "They're expecting to meet her." The pieces clicked together in her mind. She had always been quick with puzzles. "You need someone to pretend. Just for today, maybe tomorrow." His massive frame seemed to shrink with each word. "I know it's asking too much." Evie studied his face. Desperation lived there, but no cruelty. That made him different from most men in town. What happens if they discover your brother lied? They pull out. The ranch fails. His shoulders sagged. 12 good men lose their jobs. Families with nowhere to go. She understood failure. It tasted like swallowed pride and broken dreams. "What's in it for me?" Silas reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a roll of bills. More money than she had seen in months. "This now. More later if we pull it off." Evie's breath caught. That amount would buy the schoolhouse deed with money left over for supplies, books, desks, everything she had dreamed about since arriving in this unforgiving place. Why me? The question hung between them. They both knew the answer. A proper lady would never agree. The church women would faint at the suggestion. She was the only option because she was already an outcast. "You're educated." His observation surprised her. "I have heard you speak. You know things." Heat crept up her neck. Someone had noticed. After 2 years of invisible existence, someone had seen past the surface. I was a teacher. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. In Philadelphia. Silas straightened slightly. That's why you want the schoolhouse. She nodded. The abandoned building called to her every day. 24 desks gathering dust while children grew up unable to read. All children, every color, every background, the way things should be. These investors won't expect someone like me. Maybe that works in our favor. He met her eyes directly. You're smarter than anyone in this town, probably smarter than them, too. The compliment hit harder than expected. When had anyone last acknowledged her intelligence? This is dangerous, Mr. Malone, for both of us. I know. He handed her the money. But I'm out of choices. Evie weighed the bills in her palm. Enough to change everything. Enough to finally stop hiding who she really was. What are their names? Blackwood and Whitman. They arrive on the noon stage. 4 hours to transform a lonely giant and an outcast teacher into a convincing married couple. 4 hours to fool men who made fortunes reading people and situations. Your ranch hands know the truth? Rosa does. She'll help however she can. Evie tucked the money into her basket. The die was cast. Then I suppose you should call me Mrs. Malone. Relief flooded Silas's features. He actually smiled. Thank you. They walked back toward town together, an unlikely pair bound by necessity and hope. Neither spoke of the risks ahead. Both understood the stakes perfectly. The noon stage would bring either salvation or disaster. There was no middle ground left. Rosa Martinez wiped flour from her hands as Evie and Silas burst through the ranch house door. The housekeeper's weathered face creased with worry. They sent word from town. The stage is early. Evie surveyed the main room with fresh eyes. Functional but bare. No woman's touch anywhere. The investors would notice immediately. We need flowers, curtains, something that shows a wife lives here. She moved toward the kitchen. What do you have for dinner preparations? Rosa's eyebrows shot up. You really going through with this? We don't have a choice now. Evie rolled up her sleeves. Mr. Malone, you need to change clothes. Something that fits better. Silas looked down at his work shirt. This is what I always wear. Not anymore. A married man takes more care with his appearance. She turned back to Rosa. Can you help me find fabric? Anything that can pass for curtains? The next hour blurred into controlled chaos. Rosa produced wildflowers from her garden while Evie fashioned makeshift curtains from spare bedsheets. She arranged books on shelves, positioned a sewing basket strategically, and placed Rosa's good china on display. Silas emerged from his bedroom in his Sunday clothes. The black suit hung better on his massive frame. Evie studied him critically. Better. Now we need to establish our story. She began pacing. How long have we been married? 2 years? Where did we meet? Silas scratched his beard. Church? Too simple. They'll ask details. Evie's mind raced through possibilities. Denver. I was teaching there when your brother introduced us. We corresponded before I moved here. The story felt solid. Believable. She had actually taught in Denver before Philadelphia, though briefly. What's my maiden name? Evie asked. Harper still works. Good. Keep the lies minimal. She adjusted a curtain. What do I need to know about the ranch? For the next 20 minutes, Silas explained cattle numbers, grazing rotations, and profit margins. Evie absorbed every detail. Numbers had always come naturally to her. The contract they're offering, she said. What are the terms? Exclusive beef supplier for their railroad construction camps. 5 years guaranteed. That's significant money. Enough to expand, hire more hands, maybe start that horse breeding program my brother always wanted. Rosa appeared in the doorway. Riders coming up the road. Evie's stomach tightened. She smoothed her best dress and checked her reflection in the window glass. This had to work. 2 men dismounted outside. Even through the glass, their Eastern tailoring was obvious. Expensive boots, well-cut coats despite the heat, money written in every detail. Silas moved toward the door, then stopped. What if they see through this immediately? Then we're honest about trying. Evie straightened her shoulders. But we don't give up before we start. The knock came firm and authoritative. Silas opened the door to reveal two men in their 50s. The taller one with silver hair stepped forward first. Mr. Malone, Thaddeus Blackwood. His handshake looked practiced. This is my associate, Chester Whitman. Gentlemen, please, come in. Silas's voice carried more confidence than before. I'd like you to meet my wife, Evelyn. Evie stepped forward with what she hoped passed for a warm smile. Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Whitman, welcome to our home. Blackwood's sharp eyes took in everything. The fresh flowers, the curtains, her posture and speech. She could feel him cataloging details. Mrs. Malone, your husband has told us so much about you. His tone remained neutral, professional. I hope some of it was complimentary. She gestured toward the sitting area. Please make yourselves comfortable. I'll bring refreshments. In the kitchen, Rosa had already prepared a tray. They look like sharks, she whispered. Then we better not act like wounded fish. Evie returned with coffee and Rosa's fresh biscuits. The men sat stiffly on the worn furniture. This is quite remote, Whitman observed. Do you find it isolating, Mrs. Malone? Sometimes, but there's beauty in the solitude. She poured coffee with steady hands. I taught school before marriage. I'm accustomed to keeping myself occupied. What subjects? Blackwood's question came sharp and quick. Mathematics primarily, some literature and history. She handed him a cup. Children need well-rounded education, regardless of their circumstances. Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, interest or suspicion. You must miss that work, Whitman said. I've found other ways to contribute. I help with the ranch bookkeeping now. Numbers don't intimidate me. Silas nodded along, playing his part well. Evelyn caught 3 errors in our ledgers last month, saved us significant money. Impressive. Blackwood sipped his coffee. Most women find business matters tedious. I'm not most women. The words came out sharper than intended. Evie softened her tone. I mean, I've always enjoyed intellectual challenges. The conversation continued for another hour. Questions about ranch operations, future plans, and personal history. Evie fielded each inquiry with growing confidence. Her teaching background provided natural answers about education and Eastern customs. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Blackwood stood. We'd like to examine the ranch operations tomorrow, see the cattle and facilities. Of course. Silas rose to his full height. We'll start after breakfast. Excellent. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. We've booked rooms at the hotel in town. We'll return in the morning. After they left, Evie sank into a chair. Her hands shook slightly. How did we do? Silas asked. Better than expected, but Blackwood suspects something. She looked up at him. This is just the beginning. The town social at Miller's barn arrived faster than expected. Word had spread about Silas's mysterious wife, and curiosity drew nearly everyone in Millbrook Creek. Evie adjusted her shawl as their wagon approached the lantern-lit building. Remember, we've been married 2 years, she whispered. Silas nodded, his jaw tight with nervous energy. Inside, conversations quieted as they entered. Mrs. Patterson's mouth formed a thin line of disapproval. The banker's wife had made her position clear from the beginning. Other faces showed varying degrees of shock and speculation. Blackwood and Whitman stood near the refreshment table, watching everything with predatory attention. Dr. Margaret Finch approached first. The town's only female physician had always been an outsider herself. Mrs. Malone, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Please, call me Evelyn. She shook the doctor's hand firmly. I've heard wonderful things about your practice. From whom? The question came loaded with curiosity. Rosa Martinez mentioned you delivered the Garcia baby last month. Difficult breech presentation. Dr. Finch's eyebrows rose. You know medical terminology. I read extensively. Knowledge shouldn't be limited by gender or profession. Something shifted in the doctor's expression. Recognition, perhaps. Or respect. Deputy Tom Crawford materialized beside them, his badge catching the lamplight. Mighty sudden marriage, Silas. Don't recall any courtship. Evelyn lived in Denver, Silas replied smoothly. We corresponded for months before she moved here. Funny how nobody saw any letters. Evie stepped closer to her supposed husband. We're naturally private people, Deputy. Some matters don't require public discussion. Crawford's eyes narrowed, but he moved away without pressing further. The evening continued with forced pleasantries and careful navigation. Evie found herself recounting her fabricated love story multiple times. Each telling became more natural, more believable. During a lull in conversation, her mind drifted to Philadelphia. The Freedmen's School had been her pride and joy. 26 students of all backgrounds learning together until the school board decided integration threatened their federal funding. She had fought back with letters, petitions, and public speeches. The board responded by questioning her credentials and spreading rumors about her methods. Within months, she was unemployed and unwelcome in respectable educational circles. Denver had offered a fresh start, but only briefly. The same prejudices followed her west. Teaching positions required references she couldn't provide without exposing her controversial past. Mrs. Malone? Blackwood's voice pulled her back to the present. You seemed lost in thought. Just admiring the community spirit, she recovered quickly. Social gatherings were rare in Denver. I imagine ranch life requires significant adjustment for someone with your background. The comment carried weight. Too much weight. Every marriage requires compromise, Mr. Blackwood. Indeed. His smile felt calculated. Perhaps you could show us your former school sometime. For comparison. Ice filled her veins. I'm afraid that's impossible. The building burned down 2 years ago. Tragic. His eyes never left her face. Such a loss of educational resources. Across the room, Silas demonstrated his own backstory to Whitman. His brother Jacob had been the charming one, the natural leader. Silas had always felt like a gentle giant in a world that expected violence from men his size. Growing up, other children either feared him or tried to provoke him into fights. He learned early that his reputation depended on restraint. One moment of lost control could brand him dangerous forever. Jacob understood this burden. He handled town business while Silas managed ranch operations. The arrangement worked perfectly until consumption took Jacob last winter, leaving Silas alone with responsibilities he never wanted. Your husband speaks highly of your business acumen, Whitman said to Evie during a dance break. Numbers tell stories if you know how to read them, she replied. Ranch economics aren't so different from household budgets, just larger scale. Most women find such matters tedious. Most women aren't given the opportunity to discover their capabilities. The edge in her voice drew several nearby glances. Mrs. Patterson chose that moment to approach. How fascinating that you appeared so suddenly, dear. Almost like you materialized from thin air. I prefer to think of it as answering a calling, Evie responded smoothly. Some of us are meant for frontier life. Indeed. The banker's wife's tone dripped skepticism, though one wonders about the propriety of such arrangements. Dr. Finch stepped into the conversation. I find it refreshing to meet another educated woman. We should discuss books sometime, Evelyn. The offer felt like a lifeline. I'd enjoy that very much. As the evening wound down, Evie noticed Blackwood speaking quietly with several townspeople. His questions seemed casual, but the pattern concerned her. He was gathering information systematically. Outside, the cool night air provided relief from the stifling scrutiny. Silas helped her into the wagon, his large hands surprisingly gentle. How do you think we did? He asked as they drove home. Better than expected, but Blackwood is suspicious. He asked about my former school. What did you tell him? That it burned down. Hopefully he won't investigate further. The ranch house appeared ahead, windows glowing with Rosa's lamplight. Home, even if temporarily. Evelyn? Silas's voice carried unusual hesitancy. Thank you for all of this. You didn't have to help me. She studied his profile in the moonlight, strength tempered by kindness. so different from the men who had dismissed her dreams in Philadelphia. Maybe we're helping each other. Inside, Rosa waited with hot coffee and worried questions. They filled her in on the evening's events while she fussed over details they might have missed. "That Blackwood asked about you specifically," Rosa said. "Wanted to know how long you'd been in town." "What did you tell him?" "That I mind my own business." Rosa's smile carried mischief. "But he's not done asking questions." Evie sank into her chair, exhaustion finally catching up. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of their deception. "We'll handle whatever comes," Silas said, as if reading her thoughts. For the first time in years, she wasn't facing opposition alone. Morning brought Blackwood and Whitman back to the ranch earlier than expected. Evie watched from the kitchen window as they dismounted, noting the leather satchel Blackwood carried with unusual care. The ranch tour proceeded smoothly. Silas knew his cattle and land management better than anyone. The investors asked pointed questions about feed costs, grazing rotations, and seasonal challenges. His answers impressed even Evie. "Your operation runs efficiently," Whitman observed as they examined the main herd. "Most ranchers struggle with organization." "Evelyn helps with the planning," Silas replied. "She has a mind for systems." Blackwood's attention sharpened. "Systems thinking is rare out here. Where did you develop such skills, Mrs. Malone?" "Teaching requires organization. 20 students, multiple subjects, limited resources." She kept her voice casual. "You learn to maximize efficiency." "Indeed." He made a note in his pocket journal. "What subjects did you teach again?" "Mathematics, primarily. Some literature and history when needed." The questions continued throughout the morning, each one probing deeper into her background. Blackwood seemed particularly interested in her educational philosophy and methods. During lunch, Rosa served her best meal, while the men discussed contract details. Evie contributed to the business conversation naturally, asking intelligent questions about delivery schedules and quality standards. "You understand commerce quite well," Blackwood noted between bites of Rosa's apple pie. "Numbers are numbers, whether in a classroom or counting cattle." After lunch, the investors requested private time to review their notes. Evie retreated to the kitchen where Rosa was washing dishes with unusual vigor. "Something bothering you?" Evie asked. "That man went through the house while you were touring." Rosa scrubbed a plate harder than necessary. "I caught him in the bedroom looking through your things." Ice formed in Evie's stomach. "What things?" "Your traveling bag, the books on the nightstand." Rosa's voice dropped lower. "He seemed mighty interested in that Philadelphia newspaper you had wrapped around your extra shoes." The newspaper dated from her last week in the city. Her departure had been so hurried, she used whatever packing materials were available. The paper might contain details about the school controversy. "Did he take anything?" "Not that I could see, but he looked real satisfied when he came back downstairs." Evie's mind raced through possibilities. If Blackwood had discovered her connection to the Friedman school scandal, their entire deception was compromised. Worse, he might use the information for purposes beyond exposing their marriage fraud. Through the window, she watched the two men deep in conversation by their horses. Blackwood gestured toward the house several times, while Whitman nodded along. Their body language suggested conspiracy rather than simple business discussion. "Rosa, have other ranchers in the area received similar offers?" "The Hendersons got visitors last month, Eastern men with big promises." Rosa dried her hands on her apron. 3 weeks later, their bank called in the loan early. They lost everything. What happened to their land? Sold at auction for railroad development. Same men who made the original offer bought it for half the assessed value. The pattern crystallized in Evie's mind. Create impossible contracts, force defaults, acquire land cheaply. Simple and effective if you had enough capital and legal connections. How many other families? 4 so far. The Garcias are fighting foreclosure now. The Mitchells already moved back east. Evie's teacher instincts kicked in. She had always been good at recognizing patterns, connecting seemingly unrelated information. This felt like a much larger operation than simple cattle contracts. I need to see those contracts. The families took them when they left town. What about the Garcias? Rosa's expression brightened slightly. Maria Garcia might talk to you. She's been looking for help understanding the legal language. That evening, after Blackwood and Whitman returned to town, Evie walked to the Garcia homestead. The small ranch showed signs of financial strain. Fences needed repair, buildings required paint, and the few remaining cattle looked underfed. Maria Garcia greeted her with surprise and cautious hope. "Mrs. Malone, I heard about your marriage. I wanted to discuss your situation with the Eastern investors. Rosa mentioned you're having difficulties." Maria's face crumpled slightly. "We signed papers we didn't fully understand. Now they say we're in violation." She produced a thick document covered in legal terminology. Evie read through it carefully, her anger building with each clause. The contract was deliberately designed to trap unsuspecting ranchers. "This requires you to maintain cattle numbers at specific levels throughout the entire 5-year period," Evie explained. "But look at this clause about feed quality standards. They can reject your cattle for subjective reasons, leaving you with inventory you can't sell elsewhere. We noticed the cattle rejections increased after we signed, because they want you to default. See this penalty clause? If you can't meet delivery quotas for any reason, you owe them the full contract value immediately." Maria's husband joined the conversation, his weathered face grim with understanding. "It's a trap." "Exactly. And I suspect they have legal mechanisms already in place to force quick foreclosure and auction sales." The pieces were falling into place. Blackwood and Whitman weren't investors. They were land acquisition specialists working for railroad development companies. Small ranchers were simply obstacles to be removed. "What can we do?" Maria asked. "First, document everything. Every rejected cattle delivery, every communication, every change in terms." Evie's mind moved into problem-solving mode. "Then we need to warn other ranchers before they sign similar contracts." Walking back to Silas's ranch, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her teaching instincts demanded action when she saw people being deceived and exploited. But exposing this conspiracy would require revealing her own deception. The fake marriage had been risky enough. Taking on organized fraud could destroy everything she and Silas had built. The ranch house glowed warmly in the darkness ahead. Silas waited on the porch, probably worried about her safety. For the first time in 2 years, someone cared about her well-being. The feeling was both comforting and terrifying. Silas paced the porch as Evie returned from the Garcia ranch. Her expression told him everything he needed to know about what she had discovered. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Worse than we thought. They're not cattle buyers. They're land grabbers working for the railroad." She climbed the porch steps slowly. 4 families have already lost everything. Inside, Rosa had coffee waiting and worry written across her features. Evie spread the Garcia contract on the kitchen table and explained the predatory clauses designed to force defaults. "They create impossible standards, then use violations to trigger immediate payment demands," she said. "When families can't pay, the land gets auctioned to their associates for pennies on the dollar." Silas studied the document with growing anger. "The contract they want me to sign probably has the same traps." "Almost certainly. We need to examine it before you commit to anything." "There's another problem," Rosa interjected. "Blackwood was asking questions in town today, specifically about your background, Evelyn." The room fell silent except for the coffee pot bubbling on the stove. They all understood the implications. "What kind of questions?" Evie asked. "About your teaching experience, where you worked, why you left." Rosa's voice dropped lower. "He talked to Deputy Crawford for a long time." Evie felt the walls closing in from multiple directions. Exposure of their marriage fraud was bad enough. But if Blackwood discovered her Philadelphia scandal, he could use it to discredit any testimony she might give about his land scheme. "We have to assume he knows something," she said finally. "The question is, how much and what he plans to do with it." The next morning brought Dr. Finch to their door. The physician looked troubled as she accepted Rosa's offer of coffee. "I came to warn you," she said without preamble. Blackwood visited my office yesterday asking about medical records. Medical records? Silas frowned. Marriage certificates. Birth records. Documentation that might prove or disprove relationships. Dr. Finch studied Evie carefully. He seemed particularly interested in whether I had treated you for any conditions that might indicate when you actually arrived in town. What did you tell him? That patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing anyone's medical history. The doctor's smile carried a hint of rebellion. But he's clearly investigating you specifically. After Dr. Finch left, Evie spent the morning organizing her thoughts. Her teaching experience had taught her to approach complex problems systematically. This situation required careful strategy rather than emotional reactions. She rode into town alone, despite Silas's concerns about her safety. The abandoned schoolhouse sat exactly where it always did. Windows broken and dreams deferred, but today it represented more than personal ambition. At the Hendersons' former ranch, now empty and deteriorating, she found evidence of the land grab operation. Survey stakes marked new property boundaries. Railroad company signs warned against trespassing. The transformation from family ranch to corporate asset was already underway. Her next stop was the bank, where she requested information about recent foreclosures. The clerk, recognizing her as Silas's wife, provided public records without question. The pattern became clear immediately. Every foreclosed property sat along the proposed railroad route. Every family had signed contracts with Blackwood's company. Every foreclosure sale had been purchased by shell companies with Eastern addresses. At the general store, she overheard Mrs. Brostholm Patterson discussing the latest gossip with two other women. "That Malone woman isn't who she claims to be," Patterson said with obvious satisfaction. "Blackwood says she was involved in some scandal back east." Evie continued shopping as if she hadn't heard, but her hands trembled slightly as she selected supplies. The whisper campaign had begun. That afternoon, she visited 3 more affected families, documenting their experiences with Blackwood's contracts. Each story followed the same pattern: initial generous terms, gradually increasing demands, then sudden contract violations and foreclosure proceedings. The Martinez family had lost their ranch 6 months earlier. They now lived in a single room behind the blacksmith shop where the father worked for wages that barely covered rent. "We should have read the contract more carefully," Mrs. Martinez said through tears. "But the legal language was so complicated." "It was designed to be confusing," Evie assured her. "This isn't your fault. Can anything be done to get our land back?" The question haunted Evie as she rode home. Legal remedies required lawyers, time, and money the affected families didn't have. But collective action might level the playing field. At the ranch, she found Silas examining his proposed contract with newfound suspicion. The document contained the same predatory clauses she had identified in the Garcia papers. "They expect me to sign tomorrow," he said. "Don't. We need more time to organize a response." "What kind of response?" "A town meeting. Get all the affected families together with anyone considering these contracts." Her teacher instincts took over completely now. Education is the first step to resistance. Rosa appeared in the doorway looking agitated. "Riders coming up the road. Looks like Blackwood and the deputy." Through the window, they watched the 2 men approach with obvious purpose. This wasn't a social call or business discussion. "He's ready to make his move," Evie said quietly. Silas stood to his full height, positioning himself between her and the door. "Whatever he knows, we face it together." The knock came sharp and authoritative. Crawford's voice carried legal weight. "Silas Malone, need to speak with you and your wife about some irregularities." Evie smoothed her skirt and straightened her shoulders. Her Philadelphia experience had taught her that dignity was the most powerful weapon against those who expected shame and submission. "Let them in," she said. "It's time to stop running from the truth." The door opened to reveal Blackwood's triumphant smile and Crawford's uncomfortable official expression. Whatever evidence they believed they had, the confrontation was about to begin. Rosa moved protectively closer to Evie, while Silas maintained his imposing presence near the door. The battle lines were drawn. Crawford shifted uncomfortably as Blackwood pulled papers from his leather satchel. The deputy clearly wanted no part in whatever scheme was unfolding. "Mrs. Malone," Blackwood began with false courtesy, "or should I say Miss Harper, I have some interesting information about your background." Evie met his gaze without flinching. "What would you like to know?" The Philadelphia Inquirer ran several articles about a controversial teacher who advocated for integrated education. A Miss Evelyn Harper who caused quite a scandal before disappearing from the city. His smile turned predatory. "The description matches you perfectly." "I'm not ashamed of my educational philosophy, Mr. Blackwood." "Perhaps not. But this marriage fraud certainly warrants legal attention." He gestured toward Crawford. "The deputy has concerns about your sudden appearance as Mrs. Malone." Crawford looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Now hold on, Blackwood. I came to ask questions, not make accusations. The evidence speaks for itself. No marriage certificate on file. No prior relationship documented. This woman appeared from nowhere claiming to be Silas's wife." Silas stepped forward, his massive frame filling the doorway. "What's your real interest here? Because it's not marriage certificates. I'm protecting legitimate business interests from fraudulent operators." Evie had heard enough. Her teacher instincts took complete control. "The only fraud here is your land-grabbing scheme." She moved to the table and spread out the documents she had collected. 4 families destroyed by predatory contracts. Survey stakes already marking railroad routes on foreclosed property. Shell companies buying land at auction prices. Blackwood's confident expression wavered slightly. "I don't know what you're implying. I'm stating facts. The Henderson Ranch, the Martinez property, the Mitchell homestead. All foreclosed after signing your contracts. All purchased by companies with Eastern addresses matching your business correspondence." Crawford examined the papers with growing interest. His lawman instincts recognized patterns of deliberate deception. "These contracts are designed to fail," Evie continued. "Impossible cattle quotas, subjective quality standards, penalty clauses that trigger immediate payment demands." She pointed to specific sections as she spoke. "This isn't business, it's systematic theft." "You have no legal standing to make such accusations," Blackwood protested. "You're not even legally married to this man." "Then let me clarify our situation." Evie straightened to her full height, authority radiating from every word. "Silas asked me to pose as his wife because he feared you would consider an unmarried man unreliable. We believed you were legitimate investors." The admission hung in the room like a challenge. Crawford nodded slowly, recognizing honesty when he heard it. "Now that we understand your true purpose," Evie continued, "we're prepared to fight back. Every affected family, every potential victim, every honest rancher in this territory." "Fight back how?" Blackwood's voice carried less confidence now. "Education, documentation, legal action when possible." She gathered the contracts into a neat stack. "And community organization. The one thing you didn't count on." Dr. Finch appeared in the doorway behind Crawford. "Sorry to interrupt, but I heard raised voices. Is everything all right?" "Perfect timing." "Doctor," Evie turned toward her new ally, "Mr. Blackwood was just explaining his land acquisition business model." Within minutes, Rosa had sent word throughout the area. The Martinez family arrived first, followed by the Garcias and 3 other affected households. The small ranch house filled with people who had lost everything or faced immediate threat. Evie addressed the gathered families with the same passion she had brought to her Philadelphia classroom. She explained the contract deceptions in clear, simple language. She outlined the railroad conspiracy using evidence Crawford helped verify. "They depend on us being isolated and uninformed," she said. "Separate families making desperate decisions without understanding the larger picture." Maria Garcia stood up from her seat near the window. "What can we do?" "We already signed their papers. Fraudulent contracts can be challenged in court, but that takes time and money most of us don't have." Evie looked around the room at weathered faces and determined expressions. "So we organize. We warn others. We document everything. We make it too expensive for them to continue." Blackwood tried to interrupt several times, but the crowd's energy grew with each revelation. Even Whitman, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, looked increasingly uncomfortable with the exposure of their methods. Crawford stepped forward with official authority. I think we need to examine these contracts more carefully, and those shell company purchases deserve investigation. This is harassment, Blackwood protested. We have legitimate business interests here. Then you won't mind answering questions in an official capacity. The deputy's tone carried finality. At the jail, where we can review all your documentation properly. As Crawford escorted the two men away, the remaining families turned to Evie with expressions of hope and gratitude. What happens now? Silas asked. Now we build something better. A community that protects its members. A school that educates all children. A future based on cooperation instead of exploitation. 6 months later, the abandoned schoolhouse rang with children's voices. Evie stood before her mixed classroom, teaching mathematics to students whose parents had been scattered across the territory. The Garcia children sat beside the Henderson girl, who had returned with her family after the fraudulent contracts were voided. Silas appeared in the doorway carrying handmade desks he had crafted in his workshop. Their courtship had proceeded properly after the crisis ended, leading to a genuine marriage ceremony performed by Dr. Finch, who had obtained legal authority to perform the service. The ranch cooperative was thriving under shared management principles Evie had developed. Former competitors now worked together, sharing resources and knowledge that made everyone stronger. Deputy Crawford had uncovered a network of similar schemes across 3 territories. His investigation led to federal charges and the return of illegally acquired properties. As afternoon sunlight streamed through the schoolhouse windows, Evie watched her students work through problems that challenged their minds and expanded their possibilities. The whispers that had once followed her through town had been replaced by respectful greetings and genuine friendships. Truth had indeed triumphed over deception, education had overcome exploitation, and community had proven stronger than conspiracy. The lesson she had learned in Philadelphia finally made sense. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting against injustice, but from building something better in its place.